YouTube. As you can probably guess by the umbrella, it's a little bit of a dreary, rainy day, but I'm at the site of the Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. The Battle of Guilford Courthouse was fought on March 15th, 1781 between General Greene for the Continentals. He was the commander handpicked by Washington for the Southern Army. And Cornwallis, who had moved down from the north to basically the south, was the moneymaker for the British. So moved down here to secure at least this area. They had already conquered South Carolina and Georgia. So he was moving up into North Carolina, through North Carolina, headed for Virginia. Right now, Greene had set his troops into three lines, about 200 yards in front of me. Were the locals, the militiamen who came in in the North Carolina area, untried troops. But he had set them in his first line. He had three lines of defense. Basically, he was fighting a defensive battle. And the first line was those untried militiamen. He expected them to only fire 2 shots and then retreat. They waited until the British were right up close and fired their first round, blowing great big holes through the British lines, and then retreated, ran away. They ran back through the second line, which we'll get to. Coming into this battle, Cornwallis had 1,900 troops. Greene had basically led him on a cat and mouse campaign to get to this point where he decided to turn. When he had those North Carolina militiamen, he also had a line of tried Virginia militiamen who had they had been in battle before, and they were more of a known thing. And then he had 1,400 Continental Army troops, and so let's go down through this battle, shall we? So. This site is a free site, so it doesn't cost anything. It's a driving or walking tour. There's 8 stops, so I'm going to head on out to stop number 2. So the trees around here, pretty much how it was back then. So it's hard to tell which way the lines are. And Lieutenant Colonel Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee was in charge of the cavalry, and he was supposed to protect the flank of the Continentals, the first line. But as I said, as thick as this is, he got disoriented as to where that line was. And he totally missed the left flank of the second line, which is what he was supposed to fall down to, or fall back to. In the confusion, some of the British followed him, chased him, and so they basically had fragmented the forces of both sides, especially the British. And as usually happens in a battle, plans start to unravel. So, but the British, advancing up through this, basically these thick trees made their bayonets useless. They would just get tangled up in this, and so when they came at the second line, which was in these trees, the Americans, those were the tried and true Virginia militia who opened up on them and caused quite a bit of damage also. So let's move on. So after the British rolled over that American first line, they came to the second line, which was in these woods, stationed on the high ground, and they met some unexpected resistance. Like I said, these were Virginia military or militia who had been in battle before, knew what they were doing somewhat, and there was some being old growth forest, a lot of tree trunks hide behind. The thick brush broke up, and the British, they were used to advancing in a solid line, classic 18th century warfare. But this made it impossible to maintain that, so eventually it ended up being small skirmishes between small groups of men that went on quite a ways. Eventually the Redcoats were able to regroup and break through towards the third line. Let's take a little walk down the trail here and see the ground that was the American second line. So the clearing behind me is thought to be the location of the Guilford Courthouse. There's no signs of that, or I guess there used to be apparently there was like 5 other buildings. There was a tavern, small buildings. There's no trace of any of those that remain. We're talking backcountry courthouse, a place where people would come, register deeds, that type of thing. Log construction, and I believe it was destroyed shortly after that, late 1700s. But anyway, this it didn't really have any kind of military or strategic thing other than it occupied some high ground and straddled the road that Cornwallis was coming down. Greene had basically baited Cornwallis to keep chasing him, and there were little skirmishes along the way. This is when Greene decided it was time, the ground was right, he chose it to turn and fight a defensive battle. So that's why the 3 lines that they had to get through. So let's move along. Okay, so this trail passes through the actual deployment of the American third line. That was made up of Maryland and Delaware Continental troops, and he chose this ground because the high ground, the British had to cross a creek and climb out of that valley, which high ground is always best in a battle. It's hard to fight uphill, and this was some of the most hotly contested ground during the battle. In the very beginning, Americans had a couple of cannon 6-pounders that they fired down the road, and then they brought them up here. During the battle, the British were able to capture those, but still the Americans put up a fierce defense. So during the battle, Americans only had 4 cannon, And so they fired two the 6-pounders in the very beginning, and then brought them up here to the third line to join the other two 6-pounders. Very important, but in the wooded terrain around here, not as that effective. More effective in the open fields. So here on the high ground, overlooking that stream valley, it's through the woods down there. American third line, mix of Continentals and seasoned Continentals and new recruits. When the British emerged from the woods below, the fiercest fighting of the day ensued. And just as the British overwhelmed the left flank, Lieutenant Colonel William Washington's cavalry slashed in from the right and inflicted heavy casualties. Cornwallis ordered the British artillery to fire canister and grape shot into this. He was advised that his own men were going to be hit. They were in the middle of all. They were basically between the cavalry and the infantry, and he had them do it anyway. Basic. Okay, so maybe asking why, if this battle is so important, why have I never heard of it? Say the truth, I had not heard of it either. But from the British perspective, Cornwallis's troops, when they got here, were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. But they were professionals. They, even though the Americans held the high ground, the British would just keep coming. Trouble is that the way Greene had it set up, that Cornwallis lost over 500 of his men, more than a quarter of his army. They were hundreds of miles from resupply. This was basically the high water mark of the Southern campaign. From this point on, Cornwallis stuck around for a few days, hoping to re-engage Greene. But what Greene did was turn and head south to recapture South Carolina and Georgia. Cornwallis took his men to towards the coast. Now, of those men, the British that were killed, 29 of them were part of the 100 officers. So Cornwallis lost almost a third of his officers, a quarter of his men, and he's retreating to the coast. So why is this important? Well, when this was reported to the British Parliament, the gentleman who made the report made the comment that another victory like this, because they did drive the Americans from the field, so military terms it was a victory. Another victory like this would be the end of the British Army. It was only 7 months later that Cornwallis surrendered in Yorktown. So this battle was a decisive blow to his army, and there you have it. So that's why this battle that you never heard of, I never heard of, was very important. So I take a look back out over the field here. And that's it for today. I think I'll go get some dry shoes on, and see you next time, YouTube. Bye. Well, sort of, well, it's, anyway, as you can tell by the umbrella, it's a little bit of a rain, oops, shoot. Given up fighting in the north and has moved down south. The north, blah, blah, blah.